Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you, Susie. Thank you for organizing this. And thanks everyone for being here on this really hot evening. Um, I hope you're all well and safe. So I'm just gonna split the talk in two parts. I'm gonna go over two shows I had in the last couple of years, talk about some past work, and then talk about a couple of residencies I did that are really influencing the work I'm making. And then at that point, I'm going to come off the presentation and show you around my studio and talk about the work I had been making pre-coronavirus for a show that's been postponed, hopefully not cancelled, and we'll see. And that work is kind of three-quarters done, so a little bit like rough around the edges, and we'll just like look around the studio. So I'm gonna share my screen. Yeah, also I feel like there's quite a few RCA people here anyway, so I don't like I feel like but just yeah, that I did my MA at RCA and my BA at Central St Martin's, and I now live in East London. Okay, so I just wanted to start with a few quotes just to like frame my thinking about about the work I'm going to show you. So I'll just read them out. So the environment does not just surround our media cultural world, it runs through it, enables it, and hosts it in an era of unprecedented climate change. That's from UC Parika in Geology of Media. Staying with the trouble involves unexpected collaborations and combinations, and that's from Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble. It is a vast, sprawling mesh of interconnection without a definite center or edge. It is a radical intimacy, coexistence with other beings, sentient and otherwise, and how can we clearly tell the difference? The ecological thought fans out into questions concerning cyborgs, artificial intelligence, and the irreducible uncertainty over what counts as a person. Timothy Morton in the ecological thought. And this is from Mary Shelley Frankenstein, which is a big enduring reference for me. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into a lifeless thing that lay at my feet. And finally, those of you that know me know that I have a bit of an affinity with blue, and this is from Carol Maver's Blue Mythologies. Paradoxically blue, the colour of eternity, yet blue lips are a sign of approaching death. Okay. So I'm just going to show a video of some documentation of a show I had at White Crypt Gallery, which is in South London, in November 2018. And I'm just going to read a quote over the top of the video from Astrida Neimanis's book, Hydrofeminism on Becoming a Body of Water, because she has really influenced my thinking in developing this show and shows to follow. 60 to 90% of your bodily matter is composed of water. Water in a sense is an entity, individualized as that relatively stable thing you call your body. But water has other logics, other patternings and means of buoying our earthly world too. Not least, water is a conduit and a mode of connection. Just as oceanic currents convey the sun's warmth, schools of fish and islands of degraded plastic from one planetary sea to another, our watery bodies serve as material media. In an evolutionary sense, living bodies are necessary for the proliferation of what scientists Mark and Diana McNeemanim call hypersea, which arose when life moved out of marine waters by necessity, folded a watery habitat back inside of itself. Today, when you or I drink a glass of water, we amplify this hypersea, as we sustain our existence through other webs of physical intimacy and fluid exchange. In this act of ingestion, we come into contact with our companion species that inhabit the watershed from which that water was drawn: book lice, swamp cabbage, freshwater mussel. But we connect with the sedimentation tanks and rapid mix flocculators that make the water drinkable, and the reservoir and the rain clouds too. Hypersea extends to include not only terrestrial flora and fauna, but also technological, meteorological, and geological bodies of water. That is what I just read in case anyone was interested in the source. Just putting up there. And that's from Astrida Nemus's book, Hydrofeminism on Becoming a Body of Water. So this show was staged in a crypt, which was below a church in South London. And the way that the curator, Anais Lorendu, invited me to respond to the space, like we talked about it a lot, it was quite collaborative in how we developed the idea, was that we wanted it to feel like a kind of circulatory system and these connecting chambers of a body in itself. So we kind of viewed the crypt as a body, and like the installation weaves together multiple hydrological systems in different vaults that then come together through the main kind of corridor space with these pipes, these tubing that are sort of circulating the water through the space. So I was thinking a lot about veins and rivers and kind of moving through bodily flows of water and geological and ecological. So in this piece here, we have this ice that is in a vacuum mold, and the condensation is collecting and it's dripping, and it's called melting transmission. So it's kind of like a rippling kind of green-like quality to it. And then here we have the ice that's melting into a tank that then is being circulated around the space. And the work, like I was working through with a lot of salt, ice, copper, materials that would change and show time in them. So the works, as with a lot of my works, there was transformation that happened from the start of the exhibition to the final day, with the ice melting, the salt crystallizing, the copper oxidizing, and these is the main kind of chamber channel way where the water's piping through. And here we have ice that's melting through dried raw clay that is then kind of returning the clay to mush. So it's kind of echoing these geological processes with kind of these assemblages that involve technological elements. So kind of merging ideas of deep time and geological processes with kind of a corpse-like quality to assembling and animating all these elements into an assemblage. So this show came out of my degree show, which was at the RCA, and we kind of took some of the works but then restaged them in the show, and then added other works that were specific to the space. So obviously quite different spaces to show them, but I really liked the kind of raw dampness of the White Crypt, actually. I think it was an interesting place to show work and it to be kind of taken on in the work. So a lot of the systems I make are quite precarious. They involve like a wide array of elements, like there's a lot of hooks and clips, and the way they come together to make a system, that there's a lot of synthetic, organic, found, fabricated, and I kind of merged them in these kind of precarious, like ephemeral structures. And then this piece is has an ice screw holding a piece of ice, which is attached to a rubber bungee cord. So as the ice melts, the bungee goes higher because the weight decreases, and the melting ice saturates the salt, and then the salt evaporates and the water evaporates and the salt crystallizes. So this kind of idea of transference of materiality, thinking a lot about fluidity, liquidity, and like crystallization and these kind of phases of matter that are embodied in these materials. And then this piece, Melting Transmission, again, this was my degree show, and then we saw it just previously in the other slides. And I read the Frankenstein quote earlier because I think that really resonates with me in the idea of challenging distinctions between animate and inanimate. And my work has a sort of laboratorial quality to it. There's like an experiment that's happening, it's in process, it's live. I use pumps and lights, and I don't hide the cabling. There's not an illusion as to how it happens. You can see how it's happening, but this idea of the corpse and bringing together this anatomy to make this this being that kind of hybridizes kind of nature and technology. So yeah, this piece, Melting Transition, has the ice, the condensation is collecting and dripping into this tank. And that show was also, I kind of developed the ideas for the show at this residency in the BAM Center in Canada. So this is just a shot of my studio at the end of the residency. And yeah, the show at White Crypt, Bodies of Water, Age of Fluidity, kind of brought together what I was working on with my degree show. And then this residency, I was really testing out ideas of like hydrological systems, thinking about fluid in the body, fluids in like a planetary scale. And I also I really enjoy doing residencies and have the approach that I try not to take too much with me, and I work with what's there, and I repurpose a lot of materials in much of my installations. I tend not to make a sealed kind of autonomous permanent sculpture, but rather these fragile assemblages that bring together kind of quite an array of materials, and then when that's done, I take them apart and they can be reused or repurposed or returned. But I kind of have this economy and ecology of materials in my work that there isn't, no work owns a specific material. They can come together and come apart again. So this way of working, the BAM Centre was, yeah, quite a provisional way of testing out ideas. Like you can see the early stage of the ice and the clay piece and the tanks and the pipes. And thinking a lot about a cartography of space, like ways of map making that aren't two-dimensional, that are more embodied and involve like a dispersed field of view. So then moving on, this was a show that was actually up around this time last year at Assembly Point, and it was an artist-run space in Peckham, and they've sadly closed now, but they did a great job of showing emerging artists and giving us a space to present work in. And yeah, this time last year I was wanting to take my work in a slightly different direction with what we'd seen previously. I didn't want to be necessarily directly referencing science in a totally kind of data academic sense, but become more speculative and thinking about the origins of water in that way. So prima materia is, the name comes from the formless primeval substance regarded in alchemy as the first matter and the ubiquitous starting material for the universe. And this show continued ideas of geology, ephemerality, liquidity, data, interconnecting systems, ideas of transformation. The works changed through the show, like what was happening on the first day had transformed and melted or crystallized or eroded, or waters became murky. So the idea started with kind of speculating on the origins of water. So this piece is called C shaped by asteroids Vesta, and it was the only piece that was really fixed and not transformative in the way I was speaking about the other works. And it's a bronze cast of an asteroid that I made from a 3D print of NASA open source files of this asteroid called Vesta. So I was researching the NASA New Dawn mission, which was looking at the origins of our universe. And with it, I was following this theory that large bodies of water could have come from celestial bodies, from asteroids. And the New Dawn mission was looking at celestial bodies that remained from these early collisions that formed our solar system. So those initial impacts that created our solar system, this old planetary body was there. So it's sort of, as a launching point, sort of looking at this as like, could this be the origin of water? So that kind of was the first work I thought about in the show, and it's the only work that's really materially fixed in a sense. But that kind of started off my thinking for the show, which then transferred into these works that were more sonorous and live and in becoming, and there was a lot of sound, like real-time sound in the work. So this piece here is called How Far Did the First Raindrop Travel? And it is again working with the ice, but this time, and with the ice screw, this time it's melting into an iron bowl, and I had attached a contact microphone to the bowl, so it's amplifying the drip that's sort of resonating throughout the space and falling into this bowl and collecting. And there was a relationship between the melting ice and the hanging asteroid. They were the only works that were hung, and kind of speaking of like ancient water, and then the hanging ice kind of speculates on a more familiar site of melting ice that we are confronted with in our present. And so tanks feature a lot in my work, and this kind of idea of liquidity of technology, and then a liquid melting world with melting ice is kind of the idea of the aquarium kind of converged those two realms for me. And this quote by Roland Barthes, I feel carries a different kind of resonance now, especially as we're all communicating via screens, like losing touch of people that we miss. And for me, the aquarium kind of stands in for the screen in a way. So the quote is, "The world plays at living behind a glass partition. The world is an aquarium. I see everything up close and yet cut off, made of some other substance." So this idea of kind of a contained ecosystem that the aquarium is, that is also this very voyeuristic space. And it glows, this kind of blue glow, like the screens that we're kind of communicating through, but also the cold blue glow of melting ice. So that kind of, the aquarium stands in for this kind of hybrid between the melting ice and the flow of data, and the kind of, Esther Leslie talks a lot about swimming in data, drowning in melting ice. And that's why the aquariums are quite a feature in my work. And here we have a print on some silk that's encased in the water. And here's some other images of aquariums. Some have more like aquatic plants, others have like strips of images printed, and like the water becomes murkier through the exhibition or evaporates. And there's a little video of one. Ooh. Play this video. Here's some more images from the show. There's a lot of, all the works kind of have their own light source. And and quite lo-fi done, not overly polished, but they're kind of these like provisional light boxes, kind of transmitting these images in real time, like the water's making this kind of screen-like image. And then this work, Flower of the Salt, is kind of bringing together my research with like salt and salt crystals. Flower of the Salt comes from when salt used to be harvested from oceans and the evaporation pools, and as salt crystallizes, this formation is called the flower. So I have a piece of salt with a pump piping water over the salt in a copper bowl, and then there's a kind of reaction between all these substances together, and the salt dissolves and then crystals grow. And then on the right, that is like a zoom out of the piece, and there's a print on silk there with some of my research images of salt and salt formations in the Atacama Desert. Here's a little video. And then this is another detail of that work. I use 3D scanning and 3D printing a lot. So the image on the left is a aluminium cast of a 3D print of a salt crystal that I found on the perimeter of a lithium mine in the Atacama Desert. We'll get to later. And I'm really interested in salt crystals in the way that they represent water in its absence. So you get these formations out of aridity. So this idea of combining like 3D printing, 3D scanning, which is this fairly like contemporary way of sculpting presence materially, and then this kind of ancient alchemical process of casting and molten metal, and kind of bringing those two together, like the technological and the geological, is something I do a lot as like little fragments in the work. And again, there's another 3D print on the right of a salt crystal. And then this piece is called Triple Point, which is, I work with the theme of triple point a lot in my work, with this idea of 3 phases of matter existing in unison. So we have these tanks pumping water over salt that's kind of dissolving the salt and turning the water more saline, and the ice is melting on the salt on the right. So it's kind of like staging these different processes of transference. And then in the lower part, there is ice that's kind of hydrating this moss, so kind of bringing in the ecological as well, organic matter. And here's a video of just the piece in the early days of the show. It obviously changed a lot by the end of the exhibition. And then this piece again, Rain Chain. There was various like watery sounds in the space. So this was piping water up through a chain, and it was trickling down. So had the feeling of rain. And then towards the end of the show, we invited Esther Leslie and Thomas Pringle to contribute to a publication we made. So they wrote texts around water and ice and technology and data, and then Esther did a performance reading in the space that kind of brought together her research on liquid crystals and ice and sand, and she's a really enduring inspiration for me. Esther Leslie, her book Liquid Crystals has really influenced my thinking, and she was doing this reading with the works kind of trickling and dripping. I'll just read one of her quotes, which is in the publication. Is ice is a screen. Ice is entangled in human worlds, their technological systems, their economic procedures, their scientific knowledge, their metaphors and language. This is not to make ice an object of these various knowledges and languages. or not only an object of knowledge. Ice plays its part as a material, as a capacity, as a form, such that to think of ice is to think through ice, to think icily and through melt, and therefore, if thought in all its complexity and all its being and receding, being and cyclical being, it is to engage in polar thinking or to adopt a dialectical approach, such as is embodied in the form of the ice mirror or the liquid crystal, which describes as chemico-physical biological state, the fluid frozen, the mutable immutable. And yeah, Esther's work she just articulates a lot. Her research is just so vast and so wide, but she uses such poetic language that I really gravitate towards it. But yeah, ice is such a enduring material in my work, and water, and it was just really great to have her kind of share her research in that space. Okay, so I'm moving on now to residencies, because this is like really crucial for me, is like how I develop work. I really love a residency. It's like studio residencies are great as a way of using facilities and space, but I'm just going to talk about research residencies I've done, because they have kind of more directly figured in my work in terms of the field research I've done. And those are when I went to the Atacama Desert and the Arctic. So 2017, I went to the Atacama Desert, which is the driest non-polar desert on Earth, and it has like the largest natural abundance of salt, like these vast salt flats that stretch out, and it's also where a lot of the world's lithium comes from, which lithium is used to power our technological devices, phones, laptops, any kind of rechargeable device. But it also involves a lot of water extraction. So I was researching a lot around the presence and absence of water, but also about the kind of toxicity of technological extraction that enables our fast-paced lives, that involves extracting these earth minerals. I'm still making sense of the lithium part of this project, but I just want to share with you a video project that I began there called Water Atlas, which is kind of ongoing, and it's I've taken it to different things, but it's a project that is developing, and it archives my that permeate logical and artificial devices. Video is a really good way to, when I am in more remote locations, because it's portable and it's on the go. You can travel light, so I kind of just gather field recordings, make sense of them after. Right, I'm just going to jump through this. Oh. So these are all like salt flats and salt lagoons, and these are the agricultural water systems of the indigenous community we stayed with in the residencies. Is how they grow their crops. And these like water systems date back to Andean Inca times, mixed with the kind of artificiality of a pool slowly filling up in the driest space on Earth. Real. So I have these videos in my website if anyone wants to actually watch them in full. I'm just giving you an idea. And then this is when I first started thinking about Triple Point, was with this performance I did, which I took a piece of ice like frozen where we were staying, and the ground was so hot and dry that it was kind of evaporating immediately. So that idea of the triple point of three phases of matter existing at one moment sort of was embodied in this performance as I'm kind of melting the ice, kind of buying these human-made sort of forces of production, but also kind of, for me, it was quite an intimate process as well. Yeah, the piece just gradually got smaller and smaller. And I found like performance and video and sound like really have such a material practice in the studio, but when like on location and somewhere more remote, like these were, I call them like land-based performances, like a way of engaging with where I am. But also they're ephemeral encounters, but by documenting, it's sort of like there was a work that came out of this residency. So then, almost this time last year, I was part of the Arctic Circle Arts and Sciences expedition in Svalbard, and that involved us living on a boat for about 2 weeks, sailing around Svalbard, which is a northern archipelago just below the North Pole. It's heating 4 times faster than the rest of the world. And it was in the summertime, so the midnight sun, which means 24 hours of sunlight. And we lived and worked on this ship. We made landfall most days, but not always. We got stuck in the ice. And yeah, this was, yeah, I'm still really making sense of this. I'd sort of ice and the Arctic had really figured in my work for so long. And then I finally went there and so almost, I don't really know how to kind of make work out of it almost. So it's crazy to me that it's been almost a year and I don't feel like I've necessarily finished anything from that. But yeah, this was the boat we lived on, the Antigua, and most nights we would be by like a glacier or the sea ice. And we had a really amazing, empowering, all-female crew that were just so badass. And it was really, really great. This is how I worked in the residency. I was mainly had sound recording, had my hydrophone, sound recorder, camera, like hanging out of boats, just collecting, and put on some neoprene waders, which I loved, and just went in the water and put my hydrophone in and kind of just had a listen. And then did some more performances. I was thinking a lot about the anatomy of ice, the myriad of ice that there is in the Arctic. There's so many names for ice and sea ice, and I kind of wanted to look at it really closely and inspect it. And this performance, Anatomy of Ice, kind of connects back to a lot of what the work I was doing in the Atacama. In a way, they're such like different places, like extreme ends of the spectrum of water in terms of the vast abundance of water, fresh melting water in the Arctic and this drying Atacama desert, but they still connected a lot for me. And yeah, so this performance, it was interesting how I started out with these intentions of doing 3D scanning and photogrammetry and this kind of colder way of working. And then I got there and I was just so enamored by where I was that I didn't really want to be doing like data-driven work. I wanted to be kind of embody the experience a lot more. And I started just like touching the ice and kind of scanning the ice with my hands in a way, rather than scanning with a device like I would with the 3D scanning. And yeah, like touch and sensuality, and it's quite important for my work. But now I just feel like it resonates even more in this time. Like I'm going back to this work when we're sort of denied touch and that intimacy. And then like finally just finishing the Arctic thing with like a nature porn versus reality, because it was of course incredible and beautiful and sad, but also plastic is everywhere, and even at the tip of the world there was plastic. And I just have this picture just to show that the contrast between how I feel like sometimes the Arctic is framed as this like beautiful, untouched, pristine place, but in actual fact, you can see traces of capitalism and humanity even there. So now, just like wrapping that up, this is where I'm at. I am not really making that much in the studio as I thought I would be, even though we have all this time. I've found it quite hard actually. But I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot, researching, and I just took a picture of some of my favorite books or things I'm reading now, just because I'm just having a pause, I guess. And yeah, the idea of touch and distance and intimacy, I'm really like thinking again and kind of want to go back into the work I was doing last year now. And it's interesting how I'm viewing it differently in our current climate, I suppose. Which brings me to like the final part I was going to talk about is I had a show that was going to open in March in Lisbon at Belo Campo, working with the curator Alice Bonot, and it was cancelled, phoned, like many people's, because of the pandemic. Obviously it's not appropriate or right to or possible to have these shows now. So I was kind of like 3/4 of the way done, working, and then the just stopped. And that's why I'm going to show you where the works have got to at this point, because I found it hard to get back into them at this point, just with all this uncertainty. But the show is or was going to be called Triple Point. Again, exploring the like phases of matter that exist in unison, and the temperature and pressure at which solid, a liquid, a vapor can all exist in equilibrium. And so this image is of a close-up of a glass sculpture I have, and some ice footage from the Arctic, and those kind of the glass and the ice were going to be key parts of this show. And this was the space that it's going to be in. So it's 3 chambers and 3 phases of matter. So I was making the work here or designing parts to be made there, and it was going to come together in elements. But I'm just going to play you a little snippet of a sound piece, extract of the sound piece that was going to be in this first chamber, which is from the Arctic, and it's called Submerge the Blue of Time, and it's recording the sounds of escaping ice as it melts in the Arctic. All right, now coming out of that. Stop sharing. Okay, now gonna go into my studio and just show you those works and just like how I work in the studio. So I live in my studio. It's a live workspace. So it's also my home, and it's a guardianship. So it's quite nice because I've got more space than I normally would have had to make works. I'm not sure how long I'll be here though. So this is the freezer where the magic happens, and that is where I make my ice sculptures. And then here I'm just showing you my shelves of all the little bits that I kind of use and bring together in the installations. Here's some 3D prints, and that is the 3D print that the bronze asteroid was cast from. So I kind of have this like materials library so that then I like to be able to see everything. There's some more like 3D prints. Well, I'm not showing that very well. And yeah, like loads of clips and ice screws. And yeah, so that's my kind of like organized bit. I like to have everything to hand, like just to bring in at whatever moment. And then coming out into space. So the piece, the glass piece is, this is it kind of half assembled, that was going to be in the postponed, cancelled, maybe never happening show, but this is a glass blown vessel, and inside I'm going to be putting ice that kind of condensation builds up, so and then gathers around this. And I was looking a lot at jellyfish and octopus, like with the kind of visual references for this piece is kind of like aquatic being, but also like when you come in closer, it kind of has a look of glacial ice, and then with these sharp jagged edges. So like I was really interested in ice and glass for this show in the way that I kind of like existing in opposite directions, like the ice is melting and it's becoming a liquid, and the glass piece begins as a liquid and becomes a solid. But what I've been interested in for this show is the way that glass is an amorphous solid, so it has the appearance of a solid, but it's actually slowly moving within its form. It's not like a structured crystalline structure like ice. So that idea of like blurring material boundaries was really interesting to me. And then especially with the glass and the ice, the way the glass starts as a cast, and then it takes the shape of the vessel, the ice melts and takes the shape of the glass vessel. And then behind that is the bronze piece that I was talking about earlier, of the asteroid. And like I use a lot of these hooks, meat hooks, like kind of laboratorial, scientific, sort of slightly violent, suggestive like hooks to string things up. They have a kind of clinical like unease about them, as well as more like tactile, softer elements. So then that is the glass ice piece, which is called Flowing as Frozen. And then I was in the final space, I was going to have this piece, which is like a mock-up, which is called, oh, look, here's my cat. Hi. Which is called Saturation Point. So I was looking at the idea of clouds and mist, and this kind of has levels, the kind of strata, and this is like a provisional mock-up of the work because it's going to get welded out in Lisbon. But the way I work is I'm not one of those artists that can like design something in Rhino and know how it's going to work out, like see it and be with the materials. So this is like a kind of provisional mock-up. And so we have like these misters that with the water that are kind of like dissolving the salt on this copper tube here. And then above that there is this electroplated copper rock, 3D printed rock. And then in here is like a copper bowl with, again, a piece of salt inside and the misters. So it's kind of like sweating. So this idea of like clouds and weather systems, but also kind of systems in the body of sweating, and then thinking about clouds, but also like data clouds, so kind of like the technological aspect as well. And then this is a bit of the piece from that I had in the slides. It's not fully set up, but just so you can kind of see the kind of ice is melting now actually, but the ice is on top and it's kind of melting down there. And then Here's another glass blown piece with the ice inside that's melting and filling up, dripping out. And then just some like of the smaller works that I have. I've actually been finding it a lot of comfort in making smaller works rather than the big installations. I've just been really struggling in that sense, but these like kind of smaller pieces, like ceramics pieces with salt crystals growing in them. And then here are the ice screws that I use, but they would normally have ice in them. And these are used in like mountaineering or climbing glaciers. So again, there's quite like a brutal aggression there in the way that I kind of display pieces. I'm sort of, again, going back to that Frankenstein kind of corpse autopsy kind of suggestions in the work. And then, I have a lot of like tanks going on and just, this is something I made for the artist support pledge. But so I take like the salt water solution from my installations and then like put it on these copper pieces, and kind of like evaporate and crystalline. And I have like a lot of print fabric as well that I just kind of move around all the time. And then this is the piece that we saw as well, the silk piece, the silk print. So that's my studio. So I guess I'll stop now, and if anyone had any questions or anything, then cool. But thank you for listening.
Cool, thanks so much, Hannah. I'll just unmute everyone. Should have done. So if anyone has any questions.
I have a question, Hannah.
Hi, John.
Hey, thanks for the talk. That was awesome. Hi. I was a little bit late to the party, but I enjoyed it. I was wondering, on the residency that you did in the Arctic Circle, so were you the only artist there? Like, what were the other people doing? Were they?
Yeah. Is that the question?
What was the setup with the others?
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, I was just sort of curious about it.
Yes, so no, I wasn't the only artist. It was like 24 of us, and it's like it was mainly art people working within the arts, like visual artists, writers, musicians, or people from a scientific background who had got into the arts. I think like a lot of us went expecting it was maybe going to be a bit more scientific, but it was more artists who were working at the intersection of science and art. Like in hindsight, scientists wouldn't go on such a fluid expedition because we were kind of determined by the weather or like where we could go, and like scientists are working with kind of a much more like rigid framework of what they're setting out to achieve. But it was about 24, 30 artists and 6 female expedition guides who were also artists, apart from one was a polar explorer, but they were artists and polar explorers. And it was a very, I'd say the collaborative group dynamic is a big part of the residency actually, because there was a lot of like overlapping conversations, and also in that kind of group scenario you kind of all had to work together to see what people's individual projects are. There's a lot of support in terms of helping each other film. Like the piece I showed you, someone helped me film that. So the group dynamic was definitely like a part of it. Actually forged really strong bonds with people, because you spend over 2 weeks on a boat without any kind of connection to the outside world, and you really cover a lot of ground. So weirdly leaving was a bit of like separation. experience out at sea and then coming back onto land. But yeah, it was a mixture of artists and researchers. Same for the Atacama one
I
as
wasn't
well.
sure if
It was
it
a mixture
was.
of people.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, I was wondering if it was like a scientific thing.
No,
If, but have you had any interaction with scientists that are working in these fields, and like, have they given you any sort of have they kind of commented back to you about what you're doing and your approach to working with the same materials in terms of like ice and these kind of things? Have you ever had that kind of feedback from them? Or?
I think artists always want to work with scientists, but they're always so busy. But I've worked with people like Esther Leslie, who are like researchers, and Thomas Pringle, who are more kind of grounded in academic research, and then I'm more of a maker. But not in terms of data. Like I actually had plans to be going back to the Arctic in August. I was going to be sailing from Iceland to Greenland to do kind of continue this work, because I sort of came out of it feeling like I'd only just touched the surface. But obviously we've postponed that indefinitely because of the current climate, and also it would be very irresponsible to be, traveling to remote places right now, coming from like an urban environment. But I definitely would love to work with scientists in the future in that sense, but haven't necessarily had like a collaborative discourse in that way. Yeah, I'd say scientific research really figures in my work, but I haven't like worked directly with a scientist.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
Any other questions? Losing my voice.
Yeah, are you good? Are you guys good?
How are you finding it in the new studio, the living space?
Yeah,
I
me
know
and
you just
John used
spoken a little
to
bit
be in
about it, but
assembly point studios together, and we both left at similar times. Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. Like I said, like if I'm honest, I have found it hard to be making new work, and I kind of sort of came to a halt with what I was working on. But I feel like I personally really like the live work scenario. It's nice to just always be there with the stuff. But yeah, no, it's good. How's your new studio?
Sorry.
yeah, it's good. I love it. It's been a bit of a sort of savior in this whole
Yeah,
context, having somewhere that I can go on my own and it's like a
yeah,
separate space. But yeah, no,
yeah,
it's good. But I'm enjoying kind of like connecting with people in these kind of formats on the talks and stuff. And
yeah. I've been doing a lot of like, that thing I've been doing more of actually is like online stuff and research groups. Found it a lot like using my brain in that way, and like talking, especially like living on my own. That's been good. But I haven't been able to like make work in a way that I know what it is, I've just been kind of experimenting more, but like I think it's a weird time to be like, producing.
yeah, really strange.
Mm.
Can you talk a bit more about how you found the Banff residency? I know you mentioned it a little bit, but how was that in
Yeah,
terms of testing facilities and
yeah, she just looks so good. Yeah, so I've been to the BAM Centre twice. I love it there. And it's a good residency to mix kind of like it's in the Rocky Mountains, so it's everything being outdoors and doing all that kind of hiking stuff. But they have really good facilities, so it's sort of like being back at school and back in the institution, where that was a shock for me, like leaving the Royal College. It's like, oh my God, like we had all these like workshops and all these floors, and it like was, you know, you didn't pay anything to like use them, and like Banff I found a really great place to kind of go and do the opposite of what I was just talking about, but like produce, I guess, like because they have ceramics, they have casting, they have like 3D printing, and like really big studios. And it's just nice. You're just like on campus, like and that's your main focus, making the work. And the most recent one I did was like called the Outdoor School, and it was after my MA finished, and it was like kind of bringing together artists that had an interest in like the outdoors and ecology and like indigenous ways of knowing the environment, like kind of decolonizing nature. And I feel like I really learned a lot from the people, like, and the participants that I was there with. And I feel like I really grew actually out of that. It's amazing. It was like 5 weeks, but such a condensed period that it's almost like as valuable as doing an MA in a way. But yeah, I really rate that residency. Yes, they're not doing any remote because no one is.
Have you got anywhere else you really want to go? Like either or well.
Yeah, okay, so I really, really, really want to go to Antarctica. That's the one. But yeah, I'm doing a residency next year in Est Nord-Est in Canada, in Quebec. I'm looking forward to that one as well, and I'm going to do some ceramics. I'd really like to do the Bemis Center residency. They give you a really nice grant and a really big studio. But yeah, there's a residency that happens in Antarctica that only one person goes on a boat with scientists. That would be my dream, and then maybe I'd put my residency hat up after that if I got to do that one.
Any last questions for anyone?
Oh, and the Scottish Sculpture Workshop, that's a really great residency. I love that one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of Banff. It's so DIY, but it's great. Love that.
Where is it? Glasgow, Edinburgh.
It's in Aberdeenshire. It's like, you know, the Living Mountain and Shepherd Road and the Cairngorms. It's just on the edge of the Cairngorms. Yeah, that's a really great place, and you can just do what you want. There's no like red tape. And yeah, both actually the White Crypt show, I made a lot of the fabricated pieces at Banff, and the Assembly Point show, I made a lot of the fabricated pieces like the casts in Scotland at Scottish Sculpture Workshop.
The Northlands one as well, in the north of Scotland for glass specifically, that's really good.
What's that?
There's one called Northlands glass.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know.
Nice. Yeah.
Cool.
Making a mess. I heard you had some skills.
Okay, so we do this at the end of every unmute everyone. Hannah, and say thank you.
Oh.
Everyone should be unmuted, I think.
Thank you.